Well, good morning, ladies. It's so good to be with you all this morning. And I'm not just super high maintenance. I do have a neurological disorder that makes it hard for me to be stable in the world and makes my eyes really sensitive to light, hence the weighted blanket in the chair and the sunglasses, which actually at this point you're probably thinking, yeah, actually you do sound really high maintenance. And I am. I'm sorry. I am. My poor husband. But I'm not here to talk about my cranky brain. I'm here to tell you guys about our journey through our foster and adoption process, which that story starts 10 and a half years ago when my husband and I decided that we wanted to grow our family. And we knew that I wasn't going to be able to have kids biologically, and so we started to look at our different adoption options, and so we settled on foster to adopt. And I'll just explain that briefly in case there's anybody that doesn't know quite how that process works. So when a child is removed from their home for abuse or neglect, they're placed into a foster home. And then the biological family then has an opportunity to take certain steps to reunify with their child or children. And but sometimes the courts decide that the biological family will not be able to reunify with their children, and then those children become eligible for adoption by the foster parents or anybody else that would like to adopt them. And so that's kind of how that whole process works. And so we started that process, and it took us about a year. We had to do a ton of classes. We had to fill out a lot of paperwork. We had to do interviews, and we had to do CPR first aid training. And then they came and inspected our home. And then by the time we were done with that, I was like, we are actually at this point overqualified to be parents. We've done so much. So, but we finished the process finally, and we were so excited, but also understanding that there was a cost involved with this. Not a monetary cost, but the mental and emotional cost of the ups and downs and dealing with the unknowns of foster care, and just knowing that there's a potential for heartbreak. So that was really the cost involved in foster to adopt. But we became licensed as foster parents, and then within a few weeks, we got a phone call, and they said, hey, there's a 10-day-old baby boy who needs a home. And so, and it's funny because it's almost like, I don't know. It's almost like when you see in movies where they're like, you have 30 minutes. And that's literally like what the social worker said. She was like, you have 30 minutes to call us back and let us know if you want this baby or we're moving on to the next person. And we're like, okay, it's like a big life-changing decision to make in 30 minutes, but we've got it. So my husband and I prayed and then very quickly called back to let them know that we were going to take the baby. And so literally within 2 hours, we were on our way to the hospital to pick him up. His name was Aiden, and his name is Aiden, not was Aiden. His name is Aiden. And so we went to pick him up from the hospital, and our wonderful friends and family then went to Target and got a ton of baby stuff because our age range was 0 to 3 years old, and so we didn't know where within that age range we would get, and so, but then we knew. And so we went and picked him up from the hospital, and that was a really cool moment for us to bring this baby home into our family. And then we were quickly in the throes of all things infant, waking up in the middle of the night and doing feedings and cleaning bottles and a lot of snuggles and changing diapers. And within all of that, my husband and I very quickly just loved this baby. And we knew, honestly, that we needed to love him like as if he were our own child, even though the future with him was unknown. We needed to love him like that because that's what he needed. And so we were very quickly attached to him. And after about a month and a half, we started to get really reassuring news from the social worker that this case was actually going to head toward adoption. And she was saying, it looks like you guys are going to be able to adopt him. This is really good news. We were so excited. So excited because we loved him so much. I mean, if you think about it, as you're there with that baby and doing all of the things that a mom does, you feel like you're their mom. And so that was just really wonderful for us to hear that it was moving towards adoption. And so we were really enjoying watching him develop and reach all the milestones and smile and make noises. And it was just so wonderful. And we were so happy, our sweet little family of 3. And when he was 4 months old, I remember this so clearly. I was in the kitchen, I was making dinner, and he was in his little baby swing right there. And I just felt like it was such this wonderful moment, like, here I am, this mom, and I'm making dinner, and here's my baby. And my husband came home from work, and when he walked in, I saw that he had tears streaming down his face. And I didn't even have a chance to say, what's wrong? Before he said, the social worker just called. Aiden is actually going to go live with his grandmother. We do not get to keep him, and we have to drop him off tomorrow. And I just remember literally dropping down onto the floor and with my head in my hands, sobbing and crying and just saying, no, I can't do that. I can't do it. And my wonderful husband came and sat on the floor with us or with me and put his arms around me, and we just sat on the floor for a while and cried. And after a little while, my husband and I stopped and prayed. And I didn't even know what it was that I needed in that moment or what it was that I even wanted to say to God. And so it was just a really simple prayer of, God, I trust you and your plan for us and for Aiden. Please help me. And we got up off the floor and we started the really difficult process of saying goodbye. And so that night, our friends and our family came over and were able to hold him and give him hugs and kisses for one last time. And I started to pack up all of his stuff. So all of those bottles that I washed so many times, and I put them in a bag and his special blanket and all of these things. And as I did that, I just continued to think, I can't do this, God. I can't. Please help me. And so before we knew it, it was the next day, and we were driving to go drop him off. And I stood there and handed him to a woman that I had never met and watched them walk away. Sorry. And there was so much pain, such a deep pain in my heart, knowing that he was leaving and I didn't get to be his mom. But at the end of that day, my husband and I sat in our beds, and or in our bed. We sleep in the same bed. We sat in our bed, and we saw so clearly so many of the little details in those 24 hours, less than 24 hours, where God was so kind to us. And his goodness was so obvious. And we were so thankful that he continued to show his love and his care for us, even though at the moment it felt like the cost in foster to adopt was just so great. Well, as you can imagine, that feeling, that pain of loss does not go away. And I felt it every time I walked past his empty crib, and every time I walked out the door and didn't need to grab the diaper bag. And so those next few weeks were really hard. And then about 3 weeks later, we had a trip planned for Washington, D.C., and so we went, actually with my sister and brother-in-law and some other friends. And while we were there, we got a call from our social worker. And she said, hey, there's a 1-day-old baby boy that needs a home. I need you guys to tell me within 30 minutes if you guys can take him, and you need to pick him up tomorrow. Well, we were in Washington, D.C., and so we were like, oh my goodness. And we were still feeling really that and grieving the pain of losing Aiden. But my husband and I prayed, and we both said, no, we need to go back and we need to go get this baby. So we went and flew home, and then pretty much immediately had to go to the hospital to pick up Judah. And so, yes, there we were at the hospital picking up sweet little 2-day-old Judah. And the social worker was there, and she said, okay, you guys, I know that, losing that first placement, that was really, really hard. But I really wanted you guys to take this particular placement because this is such a for sure adoption situation. And so we were excited to hear that, but still a little bit hesitant because we had been, reassured before. And so but we were at least feeling better knowing that, okay, she's saying that this is a pretty for sure adoption situation. And so again, we were back into being up at night and cleaning bottles. And again, God just gave us such a love for this baby. And again, just the desire to love him as if I had birthed him from my own body. And so we did. God gave us that love for him. And when he was about 2.5 weeks old, I got a phone call from the social worker. And she said, hey, I have some bad news. And she said, he has a great aunt and great uncle that live in Arizona, and they want to take him. And so we're going to start the process for an out-of-state transfer. It takes 60 days, but in 60 days, he will be going to live with these family members in Arizona. And that heaviness in my heart was so real in that moment. And she said, you have 2 options. You guys can either keep him for the next 60 days and then send him to Arizona, or she said, the option that I think you guys should take, which is give him to another foster family who does not plan on adopting, and they can, in 60 days, transfer him out to Arizona. And she said, I know that you guys just went through already losing one, and I don't want you guys to become more attached to this baby and then have to see him leave in 2 months. And I told her, let me talk to my husband and I'll get back to you. And so I talked to my husband, and he and I prayed, and we both decided that this was an opportunity for us to show sacrificial love. That, yeah, maybe it would have been easier for us, easier mentally and emotionally to give him to another foster family, and they could send him off to Arizona. But sacrificial love doesn't work that way. What would have been easier for us may not have been the best thing for him. To go from living with us to then living with another family and then another family just in the first 3 months of his life would not have been good for him. And so we said, no, we're going to keep him with us, even if that means that we have to experience this loss again. It's going to be better for him to just stay where he's at, and we will send him off to Arizona in 2 months. Now, our social worker was really moved by that decision after we explained that to her. And unbeknownst to us, she took it upon herself to go to the director of adoptions and said, I want these people put at the top of the 2-year-long waiting list for safe surrender babies. And it's a really long waiting list because within the realm of foster to adopt, a safe surrender baby is probably the most for sure adoption situation that there is. And to her surprise, the director of adoption said, yes, I agree with you. Let's put them at the top of the list. Now, she didn't tell us that until about a month later. And we were so shocked, but also just thanking God for that. What a gift, his kindness to us in this situation, while we were day to day having to deal with that feeling of knowing that our time with this baby was going to be short. And that day was fast approaching. And so this was just, again, just such a picture of God's love and kindness for us through this social worker. And so 2 months goes by, and they had not finished the out-of-state transfer. They said, oh, there were problems with his birth certificate. We couldn't fill out some of the paperwork. It's going to take longer. So, okay, hang tight. It's going to be longer, but we don't know how much longer. And so it was just a lot of unknowns and having to daily say, okay, God, I don't know when this is going to happen, but help me to keep trusting you. Well, when he was 4 months old, we still had him, and the out-of-state transfer had still not happened yet. And we got a phone call from our social worker. She said, hey, there is a 3-day-old baby girl who was a safe surrender at a fire station, and she needs a home. Will you guys take her? You have 30 minutes. And so my husband and I, again, quickly prayed and decided, yes, we would go and pick up this baby girl from the hospital. And so we got back to them very quickly, and within 2 hours, we went and picked up my daughter, Naomi, from the hospital. Yes, little tiny sweet 3-day-old baby. And so we brought her home, and now here we are. We have a 4-month-old and a 3-day-old. So honestly, I'm sure you guys can remember the times when your babies were really young. It's like a blur. People are like, how did you do that with 2 babies? That's kind of like having twins. And I'm like, I don't remember. I was really sleep deprived. I don't remember. But somehow we made it work. Well, at this point, we continued to ask questions. What is going on with Judah? Is this out-of-state transfer happening? Are you guys still doing the process? What is going on here? And we kept getting a lot of question marks and, oh, this was delayed because of that, and oh, this was a problem, and you're dealing with a bureaucracy, and so there's a lot of inefficiency. And so but my husband at that point said, he was like, honey, I can't sleep at night knowing that I haven't done everything possible to keep Judah. And so I want to hire an attorney and see if there's anything that we could do that could make it so that we can keep him. And the attorney was amazing and said to us, unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do. Foster parents really don't have any rights, and this is part of the process. And however, I am more than happy to go to his next court hearing and plead with the judge on your behalf. And so we said, yes, let's do it. So the next 2 months, we prepared for his court hearing, not knowing if he was going to leave before then. And thank the Lord, he didn't leave before then. And so we went to the court hearing, and our attorney went in. And my husband and I sat outside praying. And I think at that point, like our entire church was praying. All of our friends and family were praying and pleading with the Lord to allow us to keep Judah. Because at this point, he was 6 months old. We were the only mom and dad that he ever knew. And we knew that it was going to be better for him if he could just stay with our family and not have to deal with being separated from us and getting used to an all-new family and an all-new environment. And so we sat outside the courtroom waiting, and about 15 minutes later, our attorney comes out, and I'm like, oh, did the judge just send her out? And was like, this is ridiculous. You know that they can't keep him. But she came and sat down next to us, and she said, you're not going to believe this. And I was afraid and excited at the same time because I didn't know, was this a bad you're not going to believe this, or was this a really good you're not going to believe this? But she started to explain that they went in and they started his court hearing, and without anybody saying anything, he said, this out-of-state transfer is taking way too long. The balls have been dropped, and at this point, the baby is 6 months old. It's going to be better for him to stay where he's at. You need to move forward with his current foster placement to adopt him. She told me that, well, both of us that, and I was like, I'm sorry, can you explain that to me again? Because I wanted to really, really make sure that I was understanding what she was saying. And so she said very clearly, he's not going to Arizona. They're moving forward with you guys being able to adopt him. What? We were blown away. I was so excited. I know I called my sister right away, as well as so many other people, and was practically yelling into the phone, we get to keep him. All of those months of dealing with that mental and emotional cost of thinking every time I held him and looked at his face that I was going to have to say goodbye, to be told, no, you get to adopt him. Oh, that was the best feeling. And so in the months ahead, we were able to move forward with his adoption. And by that September, we were able to adopt Judah. And by November, we were able to adopt Naomi. And those were such days of great victory. And also days of such great peace in knowing that social services wasn't going to come knocking on my door and say, he needs to go somewhere else, or she's going to someone else, but that these were going to be our children and we would be able to keep them. Well, 10 months later, we got a phone call from our social worker, and she said, hey, Judah has a biological half-brother, and he needs a home. Would you be willing to take him? And so my husband and I prayed about it, and we said, yes, we will take him. And so very quickly, we had Benjamin in our home, and within a few months, his adoption was finalized. And there they all are, each of them on their adoption day. Our daughter Naomi, the one in the center is our son Judah, in the courtroom as we victoriously lifted him up after the judge said that his adoption was final and his name would be Judah Lincoln Snyder, and that he would have all of the rights of a natural-born child. And then on the end, our little Benjamin outside the courtroom on his court date. He had fallen asleep after all of the excitement, but each of them on their adoption days. And ladies, I look at these pictures and I am so blown away. Within 20 months, we had 3 children. We went from 0 to 3. And God was the one that did it. And I look at these pictures and I'm reminded of the sacrificial love that it took. And I'm reminded of the cost in the process. And then I'm reminded of those days of victory that we reached the finish line and they were adopted. And then I'm reminded, especially when I look at Benjamin's picture of him sleeping, of just the wonderful peace that we had, that this was our family. But as I look at these 3 pictures, I'm reminded of 3 other pictures that tell us of God's ultimate adoption story. Our story is only a glimpse of the great adoption story that God has written. And these pictures remind me of an unending sacrificial love and a God who was willing to pay the ultimate cost. And then a triumphant victory and everlasting peace. Now, God's adoption story didn't start 10 and a half years ago like ours. It started all the way at the beginning of time when he created the world. He created it perfect and everything in it. And he created 2 people, Adam and Eve, and they had a perfect relationship with God until they disobeyed. And when they disobeyed God, which the Bible calls sin, there was now this separation between them and God, because God is completely perfect and holy, and he cannot have a relationship with anything that is not perfect. And so there was this great separation between us and God now. But God is a God of sacrificial love. Because the end for us would have been death an eternity away from God in hell if it weren't for his sacrificial love. That he looked upon these helpless, orphaned people, and he had a plan to bring them into his family. And that was when Jesus came down to be born on this earth. That he walked on the very dirt that he himself had made and created. And he came down and he lived a perfect life that we are unable to live. We can't live a perfect life, sinless, but Jesus could. There was great cost when he then went to the cross and took the punishment for all of our sin, not his sin, but our sin. And he was willing to take that punishment for us on the cross in death. But 3 days later, there was that triumphant victory when he rose from the dead and showed that he had conquered death and that we could have life forever with him. When we turn from living for ourselves and we turn to God and we put our trust in the fact that Jesus lived the life we couldn't live and died taking the punishment for our sins, when we trust in that, God, the ultimate Father, looks at you and me, helpless orphans, and he adopts us into his family. That is the ultimate adoption that ends in everlasting peace with God. If I can find my page that I have this written on, which apparently I cannot, I would love to read you, there it is, this verse that I love so much that sums that up. It's Ephesians 1:5-6b, and it says, "In love, he predestined us for adoptions to himself as sons and daughters through Jesus Christ, according to the purpose of his will, to the praise of his glorious grace." This was his adoption plan for us. And so as I look at those pictures of my children on our adoption day, and as you guys think about our adoption story, I hope that ultimately it points you to the most beautiful adoption story ever. That God, our Father, will adopt us into his family. Well, thank you so much, ladies, for allowing me to come and share our story with you and the ultimate adoption story that it reminds us of. And I hope that it will stay in your hearts and minds for a long time.